Greetings, Earthlings and others. This is Layman Pascal out front so you don't have to be, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Integral Stages perennially popular author series. As you know, we usually deal in books that are just emerging from within the meta, integrative, and liminal webs, and whatever overlapping new thought and deep culture communities those signifiers point toward. But today we've got a very special reason to revisit a book from a few years ago. Michael Fisher's text on the Marianne Williamson political phenomenon is a case study on the ways that the emotional sociology of fear and fearlessness color and control the contemporary American political landscape. Now, this book came out in 2021, just after the last election cycle, but in many ways it's still very relevant. We seem to be experiencing a partial replay of that cycle with potentially dire consequences. As we go into 2024, we are again watching Biden versus Trump. We are again seeing Marianne Williamson as a somewhat marginalized but passionate critic and voice of higher values within the Democratic Party. We are again wondering whether a third party is viable or too dangerous to risk. And we are again lamenting the anxiety, polarization, deception, and manipulation that haunt the American political system and that perhaps expresses civilization's current limit on its evolutionary, spiritual, and humane potential. And who better to criticize the American system than two Canadians? So today we welcome author, artist, analyst, and intrepid fearologist Michael Fisher. Hi, Michael.
Hi, nicely said, Layman. I agree with your intro. Very well done. Good to be here.
What was it that you saw in Marianne Williamson and in the way that she was being discussed that made you feel like there was something more to explore here?
Yeah, so just briefly, going back to 1990 probably is when I first heard of her. And I was in my own intentional community. I was sort of a director of the Center of Fearlessness at the time, just starting my own little project. And somebody said, well, fear is really important in your work, Michael. You should probably read Marianne Williamson. And I'd looked at a lot of different people writing about fear, but I had not really looked at her and began to realize she writes about love and fear, right? So, and eventually, now her conversation is a politics of love rather than a politics of fear. So she's carried that for 40 years, which is impressive to say the least. But what happened when she put her hat in, and it was really just before, in 2015, she put her hat in for run for governor in California. And I didn't know that was going on, but someone informed me about it. I snooped it a little bit, didn't think too much about it at the time. I just knew, yeah, she's a powerful thinker. So that's the attraction. This is a very powerful thinker. Regardless of everything else, I go, this is not your ordinary thinker. And so I'm impressed by that and always sort of kept, an interest on the side. But it wasn't until, of course, late 2018 when I heard that she had put up and was doing a speech on, I'm thinking of running for president of the United States and for the Dems. And I went, whoa, okay. And I listened to that speech. To this day, I still have it recorded on my computer, and I show it and look at it every once in a while because it was shattering for me to hear someone in the political sphere in America, never mind North America or anywhere in the West, just for example, to speak at that kind of interconnected, multiple intelligent ways of analyzing the world, where America's going, and just had all this dimensionality and width to her conversation. That speech is, to me, phenomenal. And I've never heard anything like it. I don't know if I'll ever hear anything like it again. It feels like that quality of a historical moment. And so basically, since then, I said, I'm going to watch a little more closely. Then I was very interested in how people responded to it. And I say people, I'm talking about America. I'm talking about even larger than that, including academics, the populist, and her friends, right? Even right down to, and my friends, when I talk and mention her name, that's social phenomenon. So when I labeled my latest book, The Marianne Williamson Presidential Phenomenon, I do this very confidently and consciously because I'm not just interested in Marianne Williamson. It's a phenomenon. And I'm playing off and mirroring here. She called the Donald Trump phenomenon when she started her campaign in 2018. She was already concerned, of course. And why did she jump in? She jumped in because of Donald Trump. And so on my book cover, I have them facing each other in these profile images. And why? Because if it wasn't for Trump, there would be no Marianne Williamson running for literally a world leader. So to me, the phenomenon of that is so interesting, archetypally, psychologically, sociologically, politically, and so on. So those are just a few of the things that still stir me to today. I can still talk about it, even 5 years of studying her and listening to her speeches. It gets very boring after a while when you hear the same thing, but it still excites me in how it interacts with the world. So now I'm interested, what's the world going to do with this? Not just America.
That's interesting when you're looking at these two phenomenons sort of emerging at the same moment and in some ways co-creating each other within the general field. Do you see patterns like that operating in other countries around the world?
Not that I know of, and I'm not a political analyst. That's one of the things of stepping in to do that book and spend this amount of time. I call it a kind of intellectual biography of someone who's in politics. I've never stepped into politics that big ever, where I really had to steep myself in reading the who's who. And I'm not up on American politics, even it's such a complex system compared to Canada, right? So I have not any other idea. Maybe you do. Do you have anything that comes to mind of those kind of polar opposites attracting at such a sort of leadership level that you sort of saw there in a dialectic relation of co-creation?
Yeah, I don't. And I think that's probably because I don't have the sort of nuanced on the ground perspective of what it's like to be in a lot of the other nations. I don't really see it here in Canada.
Yeah.
And if Marianne sort of occupies that outside the ring of the two main candidates space, and that's something that's really hard to get a sense of when you're just getting the news about other nations. But I'm curious when we look at those two phenomenon, there's almost mythic tension between them. One of those phenomenon is sort of sidelined for a number of reasons, and the other one becomes the president. Why did the Donald Trump phenomenon win, and why did the Marianne Williamson phenomenon not win?
Mhm. Yeah, so there's so many things again to talk about there. I'm going to just say off the top, the Donald Trump phenomenon is a fear phenomenon. So I'd start there. There's the fearologist in me. I want to zoom right down. What are some of the root meta-motivational patternings beyond all those surfaces and dramas of the behaviors, politically or individually or otherwise? And I looked and, I didn't do a super detailed analysis of Trump for that book. I even say so. I'm not going to study Donald Trump, but there is a chapter more or less on him. And I took a position of not demonizing him in that book. And that was because of, I think, my trying to hold some social analytical psychological perspective that would not fall totally into a political perspective only. And I find very truncated. So I was interested that Donald Trump has been born and raised in the human potential, interestingly enough, in his own particular path. When you study a little bit of his biography, very caught up in the positive thinking schools of Norman Vincent Peale, etc., coming out of the 50s and 60s, this great post-World War II, we can be great, we can reach and become the better of our natures, and we will be these great Americans and entrepreneurs, etc. And well, yeah, his father and him, they went to the same church, and it was one of these kind of new age positive thinks churches, and he was raised in that. So he watched all of that motivation stuff, and he learned. So he is a motivator. in primo, and so is Marianne Williamson. They are the type of speakers you go, and they're called inspirational speakers, and people pay big money to go to inspirational speakers. And now two of them are combating in world leadership at a world leadership level, motivational speakers. So one is a motivational speaker of fear. And of course, he knows how to put things positive. He knows how to turn, he's the master of take anything negative, he'll turn it into positive for him and his ideas, his movement, his mega make America great again. This is an amazing tool. It is an amazing skill, and he's got it down pat. Marianne Williamson, she is the mega inspirational leader in certain circles, but a large circle for the last 40 years in promoting love. And then she says, but when you look at what's underneath her love, she's saying, well, why is love so important? She says, because we're too often motivated by fear. And that's the Course in Miracles, which is her foundational philosophical guiding text for her spiritual leadership. Right? So fear-based, love-based. And so she's got this ethic moving. Trump doesn't make that contrast because he doesn't promote love. You know, he swings the positive. I'll take everything negative and all those negative people, and I will turn it into positive. Follow me. And man, he got a following unbelievable, unprecedented in American history, as far as I know, political history. So you could say before you jump in a way, you could say, Marianne, love doesn't work as strong as fear does to get a good following.
And yeah, that's what I'm really curious about.
He could likely be president.
There's some structural factors. Like I have friends that would say, well, the Republican Party is structured such that it somehow allowed Trump in, that the Democratic Party is much more controlling and won't let alternative candidates anywhere near.
True.
But at the same time, there's this broader cultural dynamic of their message and how it resonates with people. And it seems like they offer two different solutions to the fear problem. That the Trump epitomizes something about the traditional conservative approach of we can decrease our anxiety by ignoring lots of things, saying that they aren't real, saying that they don't matter, and shifting instead to the emotional chemistry of triumph and victory and what it feels like to win. And that's a very different solution to the negative emotional state of fear than the proposal of love. And do you think it wins sort of statistically because it's an easier solution, or what do you make of the difference between those two different ways of feeling an alternative to fear?
Yeah, in some ways, I guess I could say one is surface and one is deep. If you think in psychological terms, you know, you kind of got the cognitive behavior psychology, and Marianne Williamson is depth psychology, because she always says continually, go to the root cause, not get caught up on the effect. What you want to know is what is the cause, the root, the deepest. And so she comes into politics saying, I want a transformation of America. Trump is saying, let's just go back to the good old days the way it was. Now, interestingly, they are doppelgangers. There's a doubling mirroring going on in Marianne Williamson's campaign, because she's now, and more I've watched her in the 2024 campaign more so, she's now calling herself a Rooseveltian Democrat. That was not the case in the 2020 run. She was too criticized for being too spiritual and too psychologically deep. Never, I mean, she got further then politically and in the debates and everything, but she didn't get the numbers to even go into the primaries with any kind of credibility, so she dropped out. Here, she's fighting now, getting much higher vote on the polling, up to 16% of when Democrats vote, who do you want to vote for? 16% Marianne. Not bad. That's pretty darn good numbers for a newcomer. And what the difference is she found this new strategy of, I want to go back to the way it was, the way the Democratic Party used to be. And she'll repeat this language, I'm nostalgic for the Democratic Party. So you just see there's actually a doppelganger. She actually learned from Trump, I would guess, in some unconscious way. Well, you get a lot of pull when you want to go back to the good old ways. And I don't hear that so much in the Democratic message today. If you look at the Dems party and their discourses, their rhetoric, they don't talk about let's go back to the way it was the good old days. They just say, we're on the right path, stick with us and we'll pull us through. Very different discourse. So she's actually doubling the return. And, one of my, of course, being Canadian as well, I find her too Americanist for me. And Trump is Americanist too. And even Trump is outside the box of Americanist. And that's why on my cover design, I actually have Trump slipping outside of the frame. I've got Marianne and him in a box frame, but then I moved his frame actually slightly outside 10%. He's not even an Americist. America means absolutely nothing to him at one level of what his strategy is of basically domination and control.
It occurs to me, I'm thinking of it like a anecdote from my own childhood. We used to have this farm, and I'd walk in these fields of grass, and there was this time that really stuck with me because I sort of almost stepped on a snake. It was like getting electrocuted. I leapt back, I yelped, and then I said, "Oh, it's just a snake." And afterwards, I thought, well, am I afraid of snakes or not? Well, what's the deal here? And I had to differentiate between the concept of being startled and the concept of being afraid to make sense of that for myself. But it always seemed a little bit murky. And I think as we go forward, it would really be helpful if we had a clearer notion of what you mean by the word fear.
Yeah. And so you introduced me as a fearologist. So that was one sort of interesting drama of what I'm trying to do with fear. It actually is indicated within that use of that term. It didn't come lightly, that term. It came after many years of actually when I jumped into studying fear. I'll get to your idea of how do I define it, but you can see I want so much more context to it. In 1989, when I jumped in and had this very powerful visionary experience, and it said, you really want to look at this as a deep motivation for humans. If you want to have an impact on the planet and where the planet's going in its evolution, you're going to need to study this fear and fearlessness combination really, really deeply. But what happened is, as I got more into reading more and reading more, I began to realize that I wasn't happy with the methodologies and the discourse and naming and categorizing of our understanding of fear. Now I say our, I mean, I'm talking about humanity, because I was doing such a broad transdisciplinary investigation, which I took into my dissertation work as well in the early 2000s. But it was basically, I'm not happy with the way we create knowledge about fear. I find it's got holes, it's got problems. I think that's part of my integral critique that I have of how do we make knowledge in a holistic, integral way. And I'm saying, well, what have we done to fear? I says, we've studied and known fear from a very narrow set of lenses, and particularly highly influenced from Western Enlightenment philosophies of the West. And then a lot of interest in the East when it came in, right, in the 60s, 70s and merged as East-West interest, 60s, 70s revolution. And then we had a whole sort of Eastern view of what fear was. And that was kind of from a non-dual perspective for the most part. And then you got sort of the Western Enlightenment rational path of knowing and understanding fear. And so my point being is you cannot be interested in even defining fear unless it's in a way correlated with how we manage fear. How you define it, how you conceptualize it is going to affect how you want to manage it, and then all your protocols, all your prescriptions, psychology, psychiatrists, and so on, right? The motivational speakers, they all have their prescriptions. And I was just questioning everything. So when it comes to defining fear, I basically want to look at all those. I want to document them, find patterns within them, and then back off from it all and say, is there another way to know and understand fear that maybe is synthetic, more synthesis, and is tweezable and applicable in different situations, conditions, contexts. So we don't just open the dictionary or our self-help book on how to overcome fear, and it says fear is a feeling, an emotion, in response to a threat. And so now we've standardized the fear definition. And I think that for a notion of fear to be just that, from when I look at the realities of how fear influences everything humans and species do, I say species, including startled as a sort of part of the spectrum of that, to what we might call fear, anxiety, dread, angst, terror. But it's like, you just cannot go with a simple definition of that textbook definition. And it's primarily determined by psychology and medicine. And it's infiltrated the entire discourse of fear as far as I'm concerned. So I do a deconstruction, reconstruction, as you can hear. So my definition of fear is complicated, multi-perspectival, a-perspectival, in the sense of can't adopt any one perspective, even on the multiple perspectives, to privilege it over all others all the time, other than my perspective is a meta perspective. So I basically am saying I can define fear under multiple ways, multiple perspectives. If you want to have a conversation that's complicated, then we'll talk about fear, right? Rather than, oh, my definition of fear is this, and then we go off on that. So one of the strategies is to change a lot of the languaging to make this vocabulary complicated and interesting. Again, I can't prove it's better, that it actually will have better results than the narrow definition of fear. I can't prove that at this point. History may determine that. I can basically say, well, what happens if I add to fear ISM on the end of fear? And now say I'm interested in the phenomenon of fearism. And I actually think you cannot probably accurately only look at fear without looking at fearism as a more ecological phenomenon, right? That fear is impacting, and we're being impacted by the environment, by our interior genetics, consciousness structures, cultural structures, historical discourses and structures. And so what I was trying to do is make fear into an ism. And that is a kind of construction of an ideology in some sense for fear. I wanted to locate it. You hear me? I'm locating fear by adding this tech. Same when I put fearology. I took fear and I relocated it with ology. Then I said, now we've got a study of fearology, not just the study of fear. Why I found I was probably doing that is every time I would try to talk to people about fear, and I'd say, oh, I'm studying fear, and I'm really interested in fear itself as a dynamic, as a pattern, as an ecology. And people go, oh, yeah, fear, fear. And then they'd start talking about fears. Fear of snakes, fear of heights, fear of... And I went, wow, there's this automatic, and this is like 99.99%. There's an automatic reduction from fear itself. You want to just leave it quite wide open, resonating and exploratory, to reduce it immediately to fears. My fears. And I went, that's the problem. That's why we'll never understand fear in this deep understanding, this meta-perspectival way, holistic integral, if you want to call it that instead. We will just not get there. We'll not even be able to penetrate it if we've constantly got the reduction to fears. And so then you look in the Encyclopedia of Medicine and you look up phobias. 662 different phobias are named and categorized. You see what we've done to the phenomenon of fear itself? We've just put it into multiple boxes that can be controlled, diagnosed, given treatments. And the whole scientific reductionist worldview, biomedical model, loves that paradigm. And I'm going, that's why fear. So the thesis is fear is way ahead of us, and we're catching up to it. And fearology is one term, fearism is another term. I've got many more. Those are just two.
To hear you talk this way, I'm very acutely aware of the fact that hear almost no one investigating fear as a generalized phenomenon. It just does not come up in discourse. And one of the images that actually popped up for me while you were saying that, because fearism made me think of terrorism and of the kind of the propagation and promulgation of fear into the environment in certain ways. And I thought of how they say if you take a rat and wash it and put it back with the other rats, they'll attack it because it doesn't have the right smell. It doesn't seem like it belongs to the nest. And the organisms instinctively create a sort of odor, a sort of ambience. They change their landscape to suit themselves. Do you think there's a way in which human beings generally, or some types of human beings in particular, try to generate a more fear-based, more anxiety-ridden social atmosphere around themselves as, propagators of it?
Mhm. Yeah, that's such a great example of the smell and erasing, that smell. Well, yeah, sure. So the simple construction I came up with to account for what I call culture. So, if you're going to study fear, you do have to look in the natural realm as best we can get to natural. And I'm a believer in that. I come out of biology, environmental biology training, so I'm not going to give it all up as social construction. No, sorry. Um, but there is a lot of social construction. So in that biological realm, you can understand fear in certain way, and of course you could argue it's natural. It gives us our protection system. It's our startle system. It's our immune system. It's a response, right, to the environment, reacts and defends. Our immune system does that. You could say it's a fear defense system. Absolutely, it is in a way. Now, what happens with culture? When culture comes into the evolution, the biological evolution, and then starts to construct defense mechanisms. They have a biological base to them, or biological tendency, or design pattern, but we in culture have that ability to symbolize, make symbolic, represent that which does not actually exist, even called imagination, and so on. So now you start constructing. So we've got this great tool called imagination, cultural construction, and we can do that collectively. And we're just trying to build better defense systems. Like, that's an arguable case. Like, that's what humans do. They're on a path of better defense systems all the way down, all the way up. That's where fear is a general phenomenon that needs to be studied across that spectrum of defense intelligence. And when the defense intelligence turns on itself, right? It's the curve. It's like the immune system when it turns on itself and becomes a self-destructive immunological response, which several chronic diseases have. It turns against you, and it can go into what's called this overdrive cycle, right? In ecology and in biological cycling, it overdrives, and it gets into a positive feedback loop, keeps self-reinforcing itself. Overpopulation, huge die-off. Overpopulation of fear defense systems that are breeding more and more fear instead of reducing us down to a homeostasis again. We can't get out of the accumulating upper cycle of it. We're in a positive feedback loop. So I called that culturally modified fear. And I put click marks on the fear when I do that. So I know that it's signified differently than how we normally and common sensibly understand fear. And that biological, right, seems rational, seems all understandable. And when you get in the culturally modified fear, and I'm playing off culturally modified organisms, genetically modified organisms by interests, economical interests, political interests, to manufacture consent, manufacture control, manufacture security, and monetize that, and politically utilize that for domination. So now we're into a sphere of what I call the morphing of fear across all domains. And Brian Masumi, a Canadian philosopher, may or may not know, from down east in University of Montreal, I think one of the top philosophers in this country, underrated. Brian Masumi wrote a wonderful text in 1993 called The Everyday Politics of Fear. as an anthology, but he wrote the first two chapters and they just like blew my mind in 1993. This is like way before 2011 when we started to care a lot more about terrorism, right, blah, blah, blah. But he just basically wrote, and he had this good section and this wonderful phrase: we live in a society of organized fear trade. It's a new economic structure. We're fear trading across domains of the society, the culture, because everybody who wants to trade in fear, you want to trade in attention grabbing. And in attention grabbing, you commodify that into an economy of fear, a politics of fear, and on and on. And a design, we're building gated communities, architectures of fear. And then I started reading books called The Ecology of Fear, The Architecture of Fear, The Geography of Fear. Fear had exploded in the literature in the 90s and into the early 2000s. It was no longer the psychology of fear. It was there, and you're integrating, what psychology of fear knows, or even the philosophy of fear, theology of fear. But we were now into this multiple disciplinary spreading. And then basically what's happening is we're coming closer and closer to our death as a society. And so our defense systems, like, we're just trying everything. Let's figure out how to go to the other planet. And you don't even have to rely on a government, because if it gets bad enough down here, right, I'm not going to die. So now you're into transhumanism, you're into AI and all the possibilities of how we can continue in an immortality project, right? To avoid.
So you've got this is an image of,
yeah,
what I'm hearing is a healthy spectrum of organismic fear that through its interaction with culture crosses a threshold at some point where it starts to feed back on itself and become a self perpetuating, self-reinforcing, pathological version of fear. And within that, there's all kinds of incentives and opportunities for economic and survival systems to exploit. And as they start to do that, those become self-perpetuating, and they give rise to a general background motive toward immortality, which undermines a lot of our ability to be present and be value and meaning generators in a healthy cooperative civilization.
And then and you can see what's happening in that immortality drive. Like this, we're talking meta drives here, right? In Ken Wilber's work, he actually talks about in his earliest work, the Atman Project, the Immortality Project. He used these languages. And I was reading that back in the 80s, and I'm going, whoa. And I didn't know until much later, 10 years, I went, he's talking about the fear project. There's a fear project going on deep in the metaphysical structure of consciousness itself and evolution that we constantly have to deal with and negotiate. And if you forget about it and you think you're just going to build positive things and structures and you're not paying attention to that deeper meta motivational drive, that's when you just are going to reinforce a cycle that you are not conscious of, that you're reproducing. And Donald Trump is the exact immortality king god that will save the blonde, everything. It can resonate with Aryan. You got so many archetypal features there of the savior god has come.
Well, one of my questions around Marianne is around aggression and the social signaling of aggression, because like fear management has some psychological self-regulation aspects, but it also has an objective aspect of attacking and neutralizing threats. And I think the notion of aggression is very often handled in a kind of ambivalent way in developmental communities, because we don't want to be aggressive in the same way that we see the rest of the system being. And yet aggression is necessary for policing boundaries of various kinds. And one of the jobs of a political leader, maybe the archetypal great chieftain that you're selecting in the election, is that they have to show that they are able to defend the nation against attacks, and that they're ready to make decisions about when and where to send people to die. Do you think that Marianne is capable of sounding strong enough and rough enough for people to feel like she's a capable defender and aggressor as one of the solutions to people's anxiety and fear? Do people feel like they could trust her with a war?
Mm-hmm. It's coming. It is coming. I think she would probably need another 20 years to get enough of the population to vote her in as president. I wish it wasn't true. I'd love to see her have a go at it. That would be a phenomenon amongst a phenomenon, but I don't think it's going to happen as much as I really wished it would have. But when I started in 2018, I did notice that she talks tough. Why? She's a Texan, born and raised Texan. She's got a lot of the nuances, the timings, and she's also performative. She is a performance queen. This lady knows how to do theater. She's a masterful speaker. I've seen her in so many situations. So she's got a lot of good charismatic skills. And she's got the tough side. And then the other hook, which has got the shadow side with it, is she's basically quite a masculine female. And she's alpha female. There's no doubt in my mind. You do not walk into a room with Marianne and not know exactly where Marianne is at every moment. You know where she is, even though she's like, barely 5 feet something, 2 or 3. I mean, it does not matter. She is Napoleonic in qualities of, I am present, you will notice me, and you will hear me. And so she often writes about being bigger, right? That's our deepest fear, is that we're afraid of being as big as we should be. That's her famous quote that just spread over the globe and still does get repeated in publication. But your deepest fear is not that you're inadequate, it's that, you are great beyond measure. And you don't want to accept that greatness. So you can hear she's Jewish. Jewish people are on the comeback from the Holocaust. They are not going to be small. And then you got a whole bunch of the population that wants to be silent and not seen, but not her ilk, and not coming out of Texas, and not coming from a father who was a lawyer, international justice lawyer, who fought for the rights of the poor, the weak, the diminished, the deleted. So she's just got all of this drive, and she's got several behaviors, and she repeats them constantly as her moral teaching in her tough side, when she's being tough. And they come from her father. I've read the earliest biography on her. There's only 2 biographies. It's kind of mine, and this somebody who wrote one in 1992, right after her famous, the first book, famous book. Anyway, Return of Love. That biographer interviews, and you get a real good sense of Marianne's relationship with her father. Like this. Her father was the hero, the everything. And Marianne wants to be her father and make her father proud. Not saying that's a bad thing, but the question is, what happens to her femaleness, her femininity, her spirituality, that she's got all that as well, and she doesn't want to give it up, when she drives to be the great male and make her father proud, tough. And the famous phrase she repeats in her talks, even to this day, for 5 years I've listened to them, is, my dad said, never let the bastards win you. She still uses that phrase. That's his. She's repeating his phrase because that's her toughness. So in her first run for president, she was still a little bit woo-woo, na-na Krista girl, New Age community, even though she had the tough side, but it just didn't cut. Well, you watched. When the 2024, yeah, she dropped so much. She just cut that language out. And now it's economics, poverty. And she sounds like a good socialist. But she's got more than that, right? She brings in the spiritual leadership. She brings in this deep analysis for transformational of America's soul and so on and so on. So she's definitely gotten tougher. And sometimes it's hard to watch because I feel like she's given up so much of another part of herself that I really like, and a lot of people really liked when she stepped forward. And now I'm sort of seeing the tough, a little bit hard, cold, almost revengeful elements. Everything she didn't want to become kind of thing. I can see it. Tough.
If she like in a scenario where she won the Democratic nomination, or in a scenario where she loses or is ostracized and leaves the Democratic Party to run
Yeah.
as another kind of candidate, who do you imagine? What kind of person would be a good complement as her running mate or for her to be their running mate? Who would really help Marianne both win and also govern effectively?
Yeah. I think she'd need three people, her and at least two others. I'd like to put her with Cornel West, of course, who's running independent now. But I also probably like her put her with Andrew Yang. And that trio would be interesting because they cover so different. In many ways, Cornel West is another Marianne Williamson, just in a different color and a different style, but he is so like her. They're the type of iconic, don't tell me what to think or do. I know what to think or do, even though they've got this beautiful liberal, I want to hear from you. I care about the people on the street, the low, the marginal. They got this wonderful outreach, this humanistic, really appealing to me anyway in politics. But they're leaders of such a narrow kind of, I got it, follow me. I'm not letting anybody tell me what to do. And I want to be president. And what I've said before, Andrew Yang doesn't have that. He's got this wonderful personality. He's strong, but he's just got this personality. He doesn't need to be telling people always, this is the right way to go. This is the way to follow. He's got some qualities that would be really great for that trio. So that would be my pick. I guess what was I going with that? Oh yeah, doesn't matter. Can't remember. How about your pick for her combinations?
I can see different scenarios. Uh, it's hard to know the difference between the scenarios that would delight me the most and the ones that would be pragmatic in the American situation.
Sure.
I adore Cornel West, but I'm not sure how much of a positive he is to a generalized American political run. It's up in the air for me. Um, I wonder whether somebody who has as much presence as Bobby Kennedy Jr. could work with someone like Marianne or not.
Yeah, question mark.
Uh, yeah. Um, I would love for there to be, the gender balance on the ticket is always an interesting thing. And someone with experience. I'm one of the things that was exciting to some people about the Sanders campaign was the sense that he had really seen the system from the inside for a long time and it hadn't changed him. Because there's always a risk when somebody comes in and they're smart, they're capable, they're inspirational, that just being inside this machine that they're not familiar with will change them and trick them and trap them and undermine their potential to be a change agent. So people like that about Sanders is if it hasn't changed by now, it's probably not going to change him very much.
Pretty much, yeah.
But how changeable is Marianne, and how much could she benefit from somebody who has a long history of involvement within the kind of political institutions that are exerting power in the United
Yeah,
States?
I think she would draw on Bernie immediately if she ever got, up there. Um, at this point, there's such a rift in the left, which is a big draw for her, of people disgruntled left, that she's collecting, and the spiritual side of the left, that she's collecting. And she would probably be reluctant to align with. I don't see her aligning with anybody in there. She's pretty disgruntled with it all. And the left itself is disgruntled with Bernie now. There's so much fallback. He's colluded way too much, as far as they're all concerned, with all the big hot political issues of the Dems and following Biden. So there's such a division going in right now. So what would she do is, I've sort of said, no, it's kind of a little bit too late. So I'm kind of, I'm the strategist from after the effect. You should have done this. I don't wish I wasn't. My book was meant to not be that. It was actually meant to be a guide for Marianne and her team, especially if I say at the back they may run again. I indicated I don't think Marianne's going to stop. But they never picked up my book. They never talked to me, and they weren't interested. So fine. Maybe it's because I'm Canadian. Maybe it's because I have never been in a campaign. Okay, fine. But I did a serious piece of research. And the phrase I'm using of why I think she's going to not go far is she cannot have the famous 6 words, is what I made a joke of in the book. I said, and here's my recommendations. I think I listed 10 of them that for her to change going into a next election if she was to choose to do so. And it's the line of 6 words, I want to be a politician. She never has uttered that word, that phrase, in all the years I've followed her. And that tells me she wants to be president. And I don't think you can sell that to any political system anywhere in the world. I just don't think you can. It's a nice dream. It's a miracle, and she's into miracles. And she wanted a miracle to happen. And so her followers are the same. They want a miracle. But they're not looking at this real, which I think is what your question is pointing to. Who would she align with? And well, I'd say you're not going to really align with anybody in that system until you say, I want to be a politician. And from there, I want to become a good leader. And I want to be the leader. That's fine. But it's like a logical stepping that I don't think you can bypass that. I just think it undermines everything. And she's saying, even to this day, in the latest interview just 2 days ago, she's saying, I only want to go in for 1 term. And I will change all this, and this the best I can. Then, you can bring in a millennial or some younger person and they will step in my shoes and then they'll carry on. She's literally saying, I am not in for the long run. Nobody, no country is going to take someone if they're not in for the long run. I just don't think you can't hire somebody to come on a basketball team as a star and say, I'm just going in for 1 year. Because you have to be coached. You have to build those relationships on the inside, right? And so she's strategically just really gone off on kind of Cornel West the same. Cornel West in an interview, I just had to kill myself laughing with, I think it was Travis, somebody, African-American podcaster forever and down there. And the podcaster says, come on, I've known you for a long time, Cornel. And you're running for president. Cornel, I don't see you ever wearing the American flag on your lapel. And Cornel said, no, I wouldn't. This is a guy running for a president of the United States. And what you begin to realize is these folks are from such a good-hearted, humanistic, liberational trajectory, kind of like integral theory, right? This wonderful liberational path. But it's like, okay, well, now integrate that. Put the boots on the ground, as we say. Integrate that with those lower levels, whatever you want to say. And the structure.
It's seemingly so difficult for the candidates that strike us as having high intelligence and high integrity and higher spiritual capacity to also play the game. And it's a difficult game for anybody to play. And one of the things that strikes me as, I think, difficult for some of my favorite people is the game of getting free attention. Marianne's doing a little bit better this cycle than last cycle. And part of that has to just be people are familiar with her more than they were last time. And Trump was masterful in his ability to sort of hack the incentive structure of the liberal media, so to speak, right? People at CNN probably did not want to put him on and give him free publicity, but in his extraordinary and disturbing claims and antics, they had no choice but to do so. And that amplifies him. It's not clear to me that she or any of my favorite types of candidates have that ability. I remember, not that he was my favorite candidate, but when the Liberal Party in Canada brought Michael Ignatieff in to try to be their last ditch savior, and he's a smart guy and he has some understanding of the ethos of the Canadian spirit, and he just crashed in the polls. And I remember watching him at a speech in the Yukon, and I thought if he just took his shirt off and did some push-ups, he would get twice as many votes as if giving a speech, because there's something about stunts and antics in drawing the attention of the world. Does Marianne have that ability to do what Trump is doing, which is to be provocative enough and clownish enough and surprising enough to get enough free attention to amplify herself into the collective psyche?
You're using the word free attention. I guess what you're referring to, I'm just checking on your definition because it's a fairly complex and interesting term, this whole attention economy, right?
Yeah, what I mean is
How are you using free attention?
propaganda you don't have to pay for.
Okay. And then people also have to have the attention to want to go there. They have to be freed off of something else to go, right, as well. So it's kind of a bit of both.
Yeah.
So does
and
she
it
have
has to
the
be
free
sort
attention?
of like in the digital economy, which is very much an attentional economy in a lot of places, right? If people aren't watching the news, somebody has to pass you information about a candidate, which means they have to think this is an exciting thing to pass on for some reason.
Yep. That's going to get lots of likes and so on. She has a lot to draw for sure, but you can see she's not getting the real big biggies. Just give an example. It's puzzled me since doing the research on the first book, on the book. I do want to write a second book, by the way, and it would be basically Marianne next. And I'm going to wait till see what happens with the election and then try to craft that. So I'm collecting data as well. What happened in the first one that puzzled me to this day, I'd be curious what your view is. Why didn't Oprah come out publicly and support Marianne Williamson? With the massive draw she has. And her draw is probably across political lines to a certain quite degree, I would guess. That she's not just liberal. I'm pretty sure of that. And she's got this character, she's got the comedian, she's got the entertainer, she's got the stuff it takes to get this huge draw of attention daily. Can you imagine, for so many decades? And I'm going, why did she not come out when she was the one who promoted Marianne's 1992 book, A Return to Love, which is subtitled Guidelines from the Course of Miracles, basically. And Marianne's putting it in her life and her text and making it a little more autobiographical and consumable. Bestseller forever, still sells. Why, when Oprah took her on the show and Oprah bought 1,000 books from the publisher and gave them to all her friends. She said this on the interview. Marianne just went off the charts in that world of writers, inspirational writers. Why is Oprah zero appearance connection to Marianne? Not only for money reasons, and Marianne has a cap of 6,600 for donation, which is great. But Oprah could get 6,000 people to put in $6,000 if she just said anything. She says nothing. When asked about it in her 2020 run, she's never been asked about it in running in 2024. Some interviewers will say, what does Oprah think of, is Oprah going to endorse you? Because, we know that she endorsed your book, your career took off, you became an international figure. And Marianne's response is a very dubious, weaving, head down half the time, not clear. Well, Oprah makes up her own mind about it. Nobody tells Oprah what to do. And I just thought, yeah, there's a disconnect somewhere here. You would think Oprah would stand for everything politically that Marianne does, if anybody. Now, what's his name? I'm going to forget his name in a moment. The doctor, the East Indian doctor, big in that scene. Chopra. Deepak.
Deepak, yeah.
He interviews her every time, at least once. And he basically endorses her. But why is she short of funds? Constantly. Not even close. She's like constantly asking for more. Next video, I need even 10 times more than the next. And she's now, asking for 1,000 donors of $1,000 each just to get through so she can get her name on the ballots in enough states. And what I would say to all of that is she hasn't learned how to be a politician. She's only learned how to be a star. And that will take you so far. Trump has done something way beyond. So I'm basically saying, no, Marianne does not have what Trump has. And he is just the ultimate of celebrity culture, icon. And then he put it together with a political agenda that he's obviously had for a very long time, which he hates the establishment that isn't under his control. In other words, you regulators.
I don't know much about Marianne's partners, allies, staffing choices at various
Right.
periods in her life. But if she doesn't have the full complement of capacities, and some of those might be the more explicitly political capacities, does she have the ability to adequately judge other human beings and their competencies enough to hire or pick people to make up that deficit for her?
I think she knows how. She's got pretty big network in fairly big places, and I would say, and she's certainly built that over the years. She doesn't have the money backup to also attract some of the big players to be on those teams, people who are really experienced in big high ends. And then the psychological problem now is going to be, and I'll just put it bluntly, she's afraid of anybody getting control of her. And so she will not let any handler control her. Cornel West, exactly the same. He left the Green Party because there were too many controllers in the foundation of the Green Party, which has been around in America for decades. And they have agenda, and they have people who are going to tell you how we want to support you. And he probably just said, no way, nobody's going to tell me anything. I like you guys, but bye.
That's pragmatic on the one hand, that you're aware of the danger of that influence, and yet it's a significant weakness on the other hand, because that anxiety gets in the way of making strong choices. I see it a lot in the selection of running mates for presidential candidates, because very often the presidency choice comes down to a few percentages in the vote. And like Hillary Clinton would have been president if she'd picked Bernie Sanders, or if she'd picked, say, Elizabeth Warren, or a strong competitor, but they almost never pick a competitor because the anxiety about control leads them to choose a loyal, compliant, not that interesting companion who doesn't really help them get elected in the end.
Yeah, it's kind of the default crack in the alpha male, alpha female leader. It is a crack. That's nicely diagnosed, by the way.
What's your take on Bobby Kennedy in terms of the fear and fearlessness dynamics? How do you see that manifesting in his case?
Okay, I'll just preface that by I don't know much about Bobby and Robert F. Kennedy, as he's officially known, and so on, Junior. I don't know enough. I have not followed enough, and there's a lot of reasons. I can't focus on everybody. I got to focus on what I have time for. But the bits and bits I've dipped into, I'm not attracted. I can just watch myself pull back, pull back. No, not in. There's something there. I could go back to one scene. It's from a real place where I was doing some research, which was on the film by Jeff Gibbs, produced by Michael Moore. can't remember exactly the title, but it was basically a documentary film on the why the green movement in solar panels, all the green technologies was
Mm.
not going to make it. It was a farce, and there actually was hiding huge shadows underneath what they were doing that they don't tell people about. Toxins and using chemicals from mines and for solar panels, right, that are just causing massive environmental damage and working health conditions for the people that mine those materials. It was just a good documentary. It was really hard on the green movement on the left, the eco. And they went after Michael Moore. They went after Jeff Gibbs. And Jeff Gibbs, was working with Michael Moore, but Jeff Gibbs, directed and wrote it and was acted in it. But what happened, there was an interview with Bobby Kennedy. And it was kind of my first really seeing Bobby Kennedy because he was a big environmentalist. He is environmental lawyer, right? And this was before I knew that he was also doing the anti-vax scene. So this film was I think it came out in 2018, 19, somewhere in there, maybe 2020. But there's an interview. Jeff Gibbs goes up to Robert at one of the rallies, and there's a big rally, and Kennedy's, one of the big speech makers, and he asks him, with the mic in front of him, have you seen our film? What do you think about this problem that the green movement is not all utopia and there's a lot of shadow behind it and blah, blah, blah. And he goes, and Robert Kennedy, I just watched his every move around him is like he did not want to interact at all with this interviewer. And it was a very reasonable question. It was not delivered in any kind of big setup. It was just, I want to hear your opinion. Have you looked at it from a critical perspective at the realities of this wonderful vision, right, of the eco-green revival, the green revolution, the Green New Deal, et cetera, et cetera. And just I watched that reaction, everything I just immediately said, I wouldn't trust that guy. And that's what Jeff Gibbs said in the end. I don't trust Robert Kennedy. I don't trust that he's authentic. He's a great maker of story and narrative, and he knows how to pitch it, and he knows how to move, and he's very good at it, very good at heart. So those are just a few takes. Now, in terms of the fear thing, because I haven't analyzed it, I would basically say, however, anyone who taps into the anti-vax movement, and he was a leading proponent of spreading that movement and has been, amongst others, you got to basically say, okay, what is he trying to do? What is he trying to leverage, to get people on your side? And it's a pretty hot topic. So it's hard to even believe he wasn't basically tapping into the culture of fear. And I use this term very carefully, culture of fear. That's my specialty, particularly, is studying the culture of fear and its relationship to education methods. Right from populist methods to the academic methods of how education moves. I'm an educator by profession, so-called. And I study and I'm interested in how knowledge flows and what are the motivators for it. So he stepped into the culture of fear deep inside, and he manipulated and moved in that sphere. I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm not saying you shouldn't manipulate and have strategies within the culture of fear. You have to. I mean, everybody has to negotiate it. But he's a leader, and he knew he was a leader. He was a leader of a movement. He's a leader that represents a lot of things to American people. So he stepped in and utilized it. And I'm going to now make the analogy just for clarity, and I'll stop there, is Al Gore. Also ran for president, right? And didn't make it. But Al Gore stepped into the culture of fear with climate change. In 2003, 2004, came up with that big film, right? An Inconvenient Truth. Huge. This is when I was studying my dissertation work. And I went, whoa, look at the imagery, the text, the rhetoric, the discourse, the alignments. And, all positive, all humanistic, all ecological, all this wonderful, anti-vaccine. I want to save the kids from getting autism or whatever, right? And this all looks so good. And yet, you come back to, I basically accuse all of them, and it's just my own indictment. I'd have to make the case for it, but it's my initial indictment is they are manipulating and leveraging the culture of fear for gain in ideological and in political and economic gain. There's a real mirror there for me. It's not the only thing they're doing, but it's fundamentally in that fear, the sphere of the culture of fear leveraging an organized fear trade.
I'm finding myself
Yeah,
starting to think about non-duality has a number of different aspects. You know, there's
yeah.
the mystical aspect, there's the notion of a sort of pervading love quality, and there's a kind of sort of trans-oppositional mode of thinking and paradoxical appreciation of complementary structures as well. And there's a question around Trump that's really interesting in this area, I think. One of my favorite Trump moments was he was bragging about how tall his wall was going to be, and that if anybody was trying to attack, they couldn't get up it. And even if they got up it, it would be so high they'd never be able to get back down. And then he said, well, maybe a rope. And then he moved on to the next thing. And his apparent indifference to the prospective opposites, even when they implicated him, was astonishing. And I thought, oh, this kind of characterizes some entertaining things about this guy. He seems to be fluidly indifferent to opposites a lot of the time. And
Mm,
how do
mm.
we distinguish that from more genuine trans dual and complex integrative thinking, because there are some similarities. What's the
Nice.
difference between a developmentally complex mystic and sociopathic indifference to conventional opposites?
Nicely said. That's a thesis, man. You could do a PhD on that. Oh boy. I don't think there's any American commentator or podcast anywhere in America right now that would have brought up what you just brought up. It's gonna be a Canadian West Coast or whatever coast thing. We're so nuanced in our diving in these channels. That's hilarious. Yeah, so I mean, arguably, again, I said Trump was brought up in this very spiritual church. He is a spiritual guy. I mean, he will say it. I'm sure he would. I haven't heard him say it. Maybe he has. I haven't read his books, but he probably does say it. He's not afraid of that, and he's not afraid to align with the church. So I would say he is a spiritual guy, and I would actually say he actually understands the non-dual. Understands. I'm putting scare marks on that. Um, and there even could be experiences he's had of a mystical state, of a state of transitioning across oppositions as the reality, where he sees beyond that. He has a transcendental appeal from the norm. Even though he's sort of nostalgic for going back to the good old ways, he's doing it in such a transcendent way across polarities of the parties. He doesn't want to use the parties. He's using them, but he's going to diss them. It's like include, the Republican Party, and then they're out, man. Once I'm in, I'm a dictator. My next run, I'm like wiping all the system out. I'm changing the rules. It's a transcendent, interestingly enough, and should not be probably, I haven't thought about this, but I don't think we ought to undermine the transcendent pull there. And one could actually argue he's actually moving in a good direction around and beyond this ridiculous bipolarization that is stifling governments being able to act and do something useful. Again, we can value what is useful for some, what's useful for some, what's valued. But if you think about in terms of efficiency and effectiveness for operations of a head organization, he actually may be right on the ticket. Not too much different than Marianne in a certain way, although she's a little more party nostalgic. He's not party nostalgic at all. It's not in his rhetoric. He's just nostalgic for America, but America represents something transcendent to him. And so I would actually argue it is a spiritual quest. I could just see viewers just going, "Oh my gosh, you people." And so, if we take an integral distinction of the theoretical distinction and both the developmental distinction, yes. So he's tapping into probably a certain kind of state tendency awareness toward transcending binaries, which he would find just troublesome. They're just getting in the way. Don't get caught in all those. Utilize everything and move it somewhere else to a higher level of efficiency and effectiveness. And he's got a point. That's a tremendous skill. A good guru would do that. But what he doesn't have is the stage development. So he doesn't have the integration of the emotional level, the social level, right? In moving into then, let's call it the metaphysical truths and levels of development to the cognitive, higher cognitive. But operationally and functionally, he's got the tendencies for what the world needs. I mean, that's weird to say, but I would actually say that. And it's a defensible case. He's not going to get caught in binaries. Now, is he making enemies? Yes, he will make enemies. But he's always going for a higher truth. But even if you're a non-dual leader and you're working in this system, in this world, if you're a leader, well, guess what? You're going to have enemies. Oh, but I'm non-dual. I don't have any enemies. They're not my enemy. Oh, yeah. Well, Gandhi said the same thing. No, I have no enemies. I love everybody. He's doing the peace praise, and guy walks up with a gun and shoots him in the heart. It doesn't matter if you don't have enemies. It's what matters is the system. You are the enemy of something. And so I think that would just be my difference between a state awareness and tendency, probably in a brilliance there, and intelligence. You go through those kind of deep trauma crises he's gone through in his life, you get real smart about a whole lot of things, how to survive in that. And that's a defense intelligence that can move into a very offensive, intelligence, good or get twisted, as Jung would say, good intentions. He wants to make everybody more positive thinkers and operate at a higher level. Like I'm sure he does. I mean, you might say, oh, no, he doesn't really, but he probably does believe that at a deep level. I think he actually wants to get people to be more positive and more potentially good workers or, entrepreneurs, make the country great. Long answer to what you indicated. Does that distinction
Yeah,
make
no,
sense?
that was great. Yeah, thank you. I was one thing that I kept thinking about reading your book was about the way you touch on this a little bit in the book. I think Ken Wilber proposed, that his version of integrative meta theory has this way of describing left and right political orientations in terms of whether we feel the source of social problems is coming from the inner world of values and choices or the outer world of systems, resources, and designations. And I'm curious, as you think about it now, how applicable do you think that model is? Where do you think it really succeeds? Where do you think maybe it falls short or needs to be extended? How good a tool for thinking about left and right is that?
Okay, so this is really complicated now. Um, I love the integral theory, meta theory. I love it in what it's basically saying, think in these dimensional structures. So I'm just pointing out the quadrant at this point. And it's there's tendencies. And I like the idea that those tendencies of knowing, right? The subjective, the objective, the communal, and the individual, like it's just the basic ones, not saying that's everything, but those are vectors of evolution, of creation. And what really Wilbur is saying underneath, and he said it at times different ways, is that's how the universe gets to know itself in these movements. And they kind of are going like this. And then in the middle is a spiral of development, right? Starting from really early all the way down as you want. And then there's a spiral where that spiral curses across those domains of those four. That's what makes a spiral. It's moving on those vectors of attraction, but it always is balancing them all. So it's got this wonderful theoretical balancing. Now, that said, when I came to actually applying that in a research project, and this is where I think the model falls for me, and this will tell you something about how I think critically. I was working on a project for Indigenous research and heart health out of the University of Manitoba. I got hired as a consultant to come on and help analyze the data. They had a massive amount of data. They wanted to see how we could map that data on what studies from an Indigenous perspective about health of the heart could we rely on? What do those studies show? And they were trying to find an alternative model to the Western colonialist biomedical model of heart health, which wasn't working for the Indigenous people very well. They weren't liking it because it's missing what we might call the Indigenous medicine ways and knowing, right? So there was an ontological and epistemological divide in understanding heart health. So I came in and I had this integral view. I said, well, I think we could do this in an integral way and show the data in an integral map and those research studies and plot them and show the bias if they're mostly up in this quadrant, mostly up in this, down in here. But what I ended up realizing is I can't use the quadrant as it is because it doesn't have the distinction between an Indigenous worldview and a Western dominant worldview. And if you don't have that in the model itself of that trying to make a nice holistic integral model, to me, you were missing something for contemporary world in a TRC world in Canada, at least, and this is where this research was taking place. And we were trying to get into journals, that are politically correct and would never allow, you're doing an Indigenous data, you got to have some kind of ontological, epistemological, Indigenous design infrastructure in the way you're going to sort that data and interpret it. So what I did is I put a whole sort of sphere in the middle, and I just kind of called that the Indigenous, and I put a heart there in the middle. And I said, that's the Indigenous worldview. It's central. Why? Because it's more ancient, at least from a cultural historical point of view, than the Western modern dominant scientific worldview is. We're babies compared to that Indigenous worldview that has developed on this planet for 99% of our human history, is the argument. And I was relying on a particular theorist with this Indigenous versus dominant worldview, saying there's kind of really only two major worldviews. Everything else are tweaks of that. And so I put that in the center, and then around the outside, I said that's where the dominant worldviews. And so any studies that were made by Indigenous researchers and done in those Indigenous communities, they would get to go in that center circle. They can't be sorted on a Western white meta integral theory, is my argument. So I actually mapped that. We never got the paper published, unfortunately. Journal of Medical, whatever. No, we're not putting that
in.
So it's you can see where my criticalness, I'm a critical theorist that way. I do not think we can diss traditional critical, whether it's Marxist, whether it's Indigenous, decolonizing. I don't think you can throw that out of integral meta theory. And if you do, it ain't my direction. And I think it will probably be fear-based at some deep level if it's avoiding. Now, the problem is those other ones can become fear-based too, right? The political correct, the decolonial, the critical Marxist, and the neo-Marxist new left, and so on. Those also can become fear-based. So the fear analyst part of me, yeah, I'm looking for fear-based structures in that, but I'm also looking for fear-based structures in the over, nicely mapping, clean cut. Yeah, too white, too privileged. So I wobble. I wobble between those worlds for integral. Yeah.
So I know you are a critical thinker, scholar, artist, writer. You're not a political advisor, but if you were going to give Marianne and her campaign some piece of advice for this next year's election cycle, what would you want them to really understand clearly about how they could be as successful as possible?
Yeah, certainly do everything you're doing, more or less. Read my book. I've got 7 or 8, 9 recommendations in it at the end, and they're elaborated. And continually show that Marianne Williamson is not a one-term president. If you continue to keep that line, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Nobody wants a one-time star. Really, not in American politics. And you basically say, and this is what she doesn't say enough, when I get in, like she's saying, when I get in, and then she lists that I'm recommending to them. When I get in, you're listing all the things you're going to do, cancel, student loans, healthcare for all, blah, blah. It's the typical, she's continuing doing that. But what I would say, before you do all that too, or at least equally 50%, say, I'm going to align with so-and-so. I want so-and-so on my team. I want that person. I want these top people. I am going to spend months when I get in there and talk to everybody I can who has expertise in how the government works and how to see. What's happened is she's demonized now her own Democratic Party to try to get votes of the disenfranchised in America and the fed up with dual party system. She's just working for those numbers. Unfortunately, talks way too much in that demonizing frame. It just isn't going to fly. They are the party you represent. So here's where I would basically then, my last thing is, Marianne, go and read Ken Wilber's Integral Theory again, over. A brief history of everything is a good start, because you've lost an integral perspective. You're actually moving into the polarization that you think you're not. You're not curing and healing the soul of America because you're demonizing so much to get those voters, the fed up voters, or the suffering. Yeah.
I guess we're just about at the end. One final question is, so much of the way fear seems to be instantiated at the moment is in the idea of other people's political views and their sources of information as being dangerous, right? And we're constantly in this mode of fear relative to what if the terrible misinformed people were to get more power, and how can we even allow their perspectives to be exchanged, right? And meeting that with love is an ongoing challenge. And I'm curious about you personally, like, what do you do in order to love and draw insight from people who have perspectives that you consider to be deeply misguided or even dangerous?
I don't spend a lot of time in those camps. People like Naomi Klein in her recent book, Doppelganger, she actually spent months, years looking at the Steve Bannon podcasts to try to understand the other side. And that takes a lot of heart to do that. It takes a lot of guts, in a kind of courage and a kind of fearlessness, really, I commend. I don't always like how she puts her analysis together. It's not totally satisfying for me, but that's what I would have to do and would do. So what I do to survive now and live so I think I can think clearly about theory, which I care about, and philosophy a lot, in designing education, new education for the 21st century. I don't spend time in those camps looking, and I don't do it in my left side or, where I might lean more to. I don't even do it there. I find the control in the media structures, even including podcasts, and I've looked at many, okay, they're better than what we had, but they are also very limiting in the way they can create a discourse, the way they can attract their audiences, and they're all dependent on audiences too. I have a podcast myself. If I do certain things, I'll get, no viewers. And so I attempt basically to really limit my diet on absorbing a lot of that information and take what I've got, take the best of what I got, and keep attempting to think more clearly and take it further and further. And I want to come with solutions to those camps. And I would only do that whether it's solutions to the left and I have solutions for the right. I'd love to be invited as a consultant to either of those camps about fearology. So the simple is develop fearology and develop it really well so that it's got bridging capacities. And this is across conflictual, oppositional divides. And my argument basically is if I did that with love, then I'd be a minister. If I'm going to be a scholar and a practitioner in education for all people, I got to do it through fearology. That's what I've come to. Fear is as important of a foundation as love. So I think I can talk to both sides about fear. Secular or spiritual or religious, it wouldn't matter. It's like it crosses everything.
The universal language.
The universal language. Yes. Now, the great thing that to complete that is the dialectical is, and it's in my teachings and it's in the book, even on Marianne Williamson. I only am interested in fear as much as I'm interested in fearlessness. I do not separate those ever. So when you come to what's my definition of fear, I would go da 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 da, and then I go, and that's moves to fearlessness. I don't want to talk about them separate. That's why I don't do the love fear thing much. I analyze that, but it's very abstract and it's very metaphysical. So I say the path of fearlessness is what runs between them. How do we negotiate that path? That's the path of fearlessness. Thanks for that. Thanks for chatting with me today.
This has been a pleasure, Michael, and I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to reading the next volume of the Marianne analysis, and also anything else you're doing. If you have other books come out or other projects come up, we'd love to talk to you because this was a real pleasure.
Pleasure too. Okay, see you.
All right.